TV. The 7 main parties were represented by Penny Mordaunt for the Conservatives, Angela Rayner for the Labour Party, Daisy Cooper for the Liberal Democrats, Stephen Flynn of the SNP, Nigel Farage, Reform UK, Carla Denyer for the Green Party, and Rayner Penny for Plaid Cymru. And Theo Usherwood joins us here in the studio, our political correspondent, and has been looking at some of the standout moments so far. Good evening, Theo.
Good evening.
It's quite hard, sort of attuning your brain, I'd imagine, from you know quite an in-depth, heavy session with Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak last night to then tonight trying to take in 7 different voices.
It's quite a difficult format because you go from something that's quite straightforward, head-to-head between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. Last night's the format was slightly different because you had Beth doing the interviews and then questions from the audience, more of a question time style debate. But this turns. The format with Julie Etchingham is she takes a question from the audience. They get a turn. Each of the candidates or gets a turn to take an answer.
Is there a time limit on that?
Yes, and they try to limit it so everybody has the same amount. And then it sort of descends into a sort of pile-on where they sort of shout at each other. And I don't exaggerate. You'll hear this in a moment. But of course, Nigel Farage, suited and booted from Reform UK, leader of Reform UK. Suitably, of course, revved up by the fact that buoyed up by the fact that Reform UK have now overtaken the Tories in at least in the first YouGov poll with the Times tonight, and of course he made no secret of that when he got to introduce himself.
I'm Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK. Just before we came on air, we overtook the Conservatives in the national opinion polls. We are now the opposition to Labour.
So that's a bold opening, isn't it? It's a bold opening. But actually, what you with this dynamic of Farage in the mix, what you see, and we saw it last time in the 7-way debate, is Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt trying to squeeze out Farage. It's in neither of the Labour Party's interests or the Conservatives' interests for Nigel Farage to get a foothold into these debates. What they really want to do, Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt, is to take each other on, and that's exactly what they did over tax.
We can't tax our way out of this. We've got the highest tax burden
but that is
in
exactly
70
what
years.
you're going to do.
Good.
You have a black hole of 38.5 billion. Their manifesto
I don't know how you could
was
talk
published
about
today.
black holes.
Labour's manifesto was published today. 38.5 billion is the tax gap in their plans. And the only way, because public spending is going to have to go up, that's the demand. The only way they are going to be able to do that is to raise taxes. They've only declared about a quarter of the taxes they're going to put up. They're going to have to put up a lot more, and they haven't yet told you how they're going to do that.
Angela Rayner respond to that?
You can't afford that. You cannot afford that.
You can't afford another 5 years of the Tories. You're promising tax cuts when you've already done that once and crashed the economy once.
38.5 billion, I should say, is the disputed figure.
Yes.
You remember that dossier that there was a row with the civil servants about their involvement, and the fact it was a political
and that doesn't
document.
account for any savings that Labour make, savings or VAT on school fees, etc., etc. So that is just the kind of one side of the balance sheet.
The more accurate figure that we've been discussing previously, and that we've, as a result of the manifesto, is that £20 billion figure in terms of the cuts that are going to need to be made in the next couple of years to departments, unprotected departments, and where the money's going to come from that. And of course, the accusation from Penny Mordaunt there is that actually that Labour will have to detail further tax cuts, looking at things like CGT or capital gains tax or re-evaluation of council tax bans, fuel duty, if they want to actually keep those save those departments from those quite stringent spending cuts.
All right, Julie Etchingham, the ITV moderator, asked the participants to raise their hands if they supported. We had this last time, didn't we? The old raise your hand thing. If they supported bringing down immigration, which led to another flashpoint between the two.
You did raise your hand alongside Nigel Farage on that question, Angela Rayner.
Yeah, because the Tories, they talk about a cap, but we've had net migration going up and up because our economy has relied on overseas workers well, it's flatlining. But what we've said is that we need an industrial and skills strategy because we've got unemployment going up in the latest figures.
So we've got to make sure years to come up with some ideas on this, and we have. We've got We've got a workforce plan for the NHS. We've got a workforce plan for social care.
You don't have a workforce plan for social care.
It will inform a
You refuse
vote
to publish
on
one.
the floor of the House of Commons from your democratically elected representatives. Will be able to cap the visas.
It is
we
absolute rubbish. You've had
talk about the
14
issues that the
years
questioner put.
and net migration has gone
up. You have no
up.
idea. You have no workforce strategy. You have no industrial strategy. You have no
Are you talking to me or Rishi?
Thank you.
You heard Nigel Farage there sort of sighing, oh dear, as he couldn't get a word in edgeways. Of course, Labour did announce their industrial strategy today, but it's not actually backed up by a huge amount of resource or money. Penny Mordaunt, of course, making the point, and I'm not sure the Tories count as a workforce strategy, but there was an announcement from earlier on in the campaign and this was immediately after Nigel Farage said he was throwing his hat into the ring in terms of standing, but they will give MPs the chance that this is the Conservative plan to vote on the floor of the House of Commons about a cap or a quota, and that's in terms of legal migration of people coming here on specific work visas.
And they would take advice, wouldn't they, from the Migration Advisory Committee to do that. I just wonder what we've heard. So has Daisy Cooper been able to get a word in edgeways? Similarly,
yeah, Stephen Flynn, Daisy Cooper, they've been Carla Denyer from the Greens, and it was quite interesting as the juxtaposition between the smaller parties, and of course Plaid Cymru as well, and Nigel Farage, and they're trying to position themselves, Stephen Flynn in particular from the SNP, as actually being a sort of liberal alternative, positive about immigration, saying that the country needs immigration, whereas Nigel Farage is, of course, advocating a policy of bringing net migration down to zero.
Okay. What else have we heard? So I'm having a quick look at some of the latest bits, which you may have been in here for, but Daisy Cooper saying the Liberal Democrats want to create a Royal College of Care Workers.
Yes, the NHS is featured. The NHS is featured heavily. It was the first topic that was brought up, of course, in the debate, and of course, the NHS is the focal point, I guess the line of fracture is that Nigel Farage is advocating an insurance-based system versus Labour and the Conservatives, which is saying, well, actually, there's an argument about the use of private healthcare. Wes Streeting his comments about using private healthcare in specific cases to try and bring down the waiting list of 7 million.
I
remember you spoke
I
to
asked
him
Wes last night whether he would use private healthcare, and he said he'd had a scare recently and he did think about it. Luckily, he got his appointment through quickly, but had he not got his appointment through, he said that he would have gone private. I was actually asking a question about taxing private healthcare as well as taxing VAT on, adding on VAT to private health.
In contrast to his leader, Sir Keir Starmer,
yes,
who said he wouldn't use private healthcare even if somebody who he loved very much actually really needed that urgent treatment. It's an ideological hot potato for Labour, this idea of private healthcare. Something actually Nigel Farage made this point in the debate, is that because Labour is so wedded to the ideology of free at the point of use healthcare within the NHS, that there's a split there that they're unable to move away from, or they find it very difficult to move away from the idea of actually everything being based around the state and state funded, and being able to incorporate private healthcare, or even the idea of an insurance-based system.
Yeah.
And Nigel Farage making the point that actually in France they have a mutually beneficial insurance system,
social
insurance system which works, and you don't necessarily have the pressures that you have on the NHS in this country.
One other thing to mention is that certainly in last night's leaders event, and actually throughout these debates, the audience have become a part of it, either heckling or laughing or groaning. And there was a bit of that tonight when education was mentioned. So Penny Mordaunt described the UK education system as world class.
A lot of laughter to that point.
Yeah, funny one to laugh at, because that has always been something that the Conservatives are very proud of, the fact that our results are better
Especially
than
around
ever.
reading in primary schools.
Yes, exactly that. But also the performance of state secondary schools has got so much better. So that was curious to me. How did she handle that?
Well, she tried to, there was a laughter, and Julie Etchingham runs quite a tight ship, I should say, she doesn't suddenly incorporate the audience members who started laughing at Penny Mordaunt. But it moved on. But I think there is a narrative building, and you're starting to see it, that anything to do with public services or the state of public services, that the Conservatives and Conservative candidates, when they're appearing on debates or elsewhere, can't get away from the fact that people think that the country is broken. Now, whether that's borne out in reality or not is not, it almost becomes neither here nor there. The narrative of people's perception is that things like our schools, and you make the point, actually, education has been actually, we've had the pandemic. It's taken a huge hit during COVID, with, of course, schools being closed, but for months on end. But actually, secondary schools have improved. Primary schools, we've seen great results in terms of reading. But the Tories don't seem to be able to, because of other public services or a wider perception, a wider narrative about the state of public services, the Tories don't seem to be able to land their points. Rather it becomes around the public laughing at them, or it's sort of invoking this idea that actually things are in a really dire state and everything's broken.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for being across that. Really appreciate it. That is the political correspondent Theo Usherwood, who's been across that 7-way debate.